For the Lord of the Galadriel is accounted the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth, and a giver of gifts beyond the power of kings. He has dwelt in the west since the days of dawn, and I have dwelt with him years uncounted. For ere the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin, I passed over the mountains, and together, through ages of the world, we have fought the long defeat. Sweelide and Mygovanen, my friends, Yoistin here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. For today's video, I asked you all to vote for an elf lord on last week's poll, and while it was narrowly split, Celeborn polled the most votes. So today we will be discussing the Lord of Lothlorien and the Galadriel, Celeborn. There will be some related articles and videos in the description and cards to help outline and reinforce what we discuss here today. Everyone, as always, thank you all so much for joining me. Let's begin our adventure. Celeborn, or in his Teleran name, Teleporno, the kinsman of Thingol, whose name means silver tall, and in the original etymologies meant silver tree, was born sometime in the years of the trees, likely in Eglador or Doriath. Now, according to an alternative version of Celeborn's history, Tolkien toyed with the idea of making him rather of the Teleri of Alqualonde, one of the Falmari of Olwe, and having him come east into Middle-earth from the Undying Lands after having been persuaded by Artanis, an alternative version of Galadriel, following the stories of Feanor of the wide lands to the east, after the first kinslaying. However, this telling of the tale never came to be canonized, and is recorded in the unfinished tales. So thus we'll be told what we know concerning Celeborn's actual canonical history. Celeborn himself was tall, being 6 feet and 4 inches tall, or 193 centimeters, with Galadriel being the same height. His hair was long and silver, with his height and hair matching his name. In terms of his personality, Galadriel remarked Celeborn to be accounted the wisest of elves in Middle-earth during the late Third Age, but in that I actually may have to disagree with Galadriel, for I would argue that Galadriel, Círdan, or Elrond were perhaps wiser elves, for Celeborn held grudges, such as those he had with the dwarves, and he was in some ways arrogant, but always did Galadriel pass on her wisdom to her husband. But Celeborn was still a virtuous elf, with great leadership, both in times of peace and war. Now, concerning the Elf Lord's history, we start back in the First Age, before the Great War broke Beleriand, and many elves dwelt still in this world. Celeborn was the son of Galathon, and grandson of Elmo, who was yet the brother of Ilu Thingol, thus making Celeborn the grand-nephew of Thingol of Doriath. Celeborn also had a brother named Galathil, whose daughter Nimloth would marry the grandson of Thingol, Dior. Indeed, Celeborn dwelt in Doriath during most of the First Age, and there came a time when the Noldor of the West crossed back into Middle-earth in the pursuit of the Silmarils and in vengeance against the Dark Lord Morgoth. So 2 of the children of Finarfin, Galadriel and Finrod, came to Doriath in peace, and thus Galadriel and Celeborn met and fell in love under the leaves of Doriath. They wedded, and Galadriel remained with her husband in Doriath for many years, even when her brother went on to establish the kingdom of Nargothrond. For many of the years of the First Age, Celeborn and Galadriel remained mostly inactive in the great stories of the world, and I would like to think that they spent many of these years in peaceful happiness and love in Doriath, gleaning much wisdom and power from the events and great people of the world at that time. Eventually, by 495 of the First Age, and the fall of Nargothrond, but before the fall of Doriath to both the dwarves of Nogrod and the sons of Feanor afterwards, Galadriel went on over the Blue Mountains and further into Middle-earth from Beleriand, and I am unsure whether Celeborn followed at that time or was present during the ruin of Doriath and followed Galadriel thereafter. His later enmity with the dwarves that followed the death of Thingol would support the idea that he stayed and fought in the Battle of the Thousand Caves, leaving after that, but I cannot be sure. But Beleriand would be sundered at the end of the age during the War of Wrath, and Celeborn and Galadriel would move to Lindon, and Celeborn ruled the mostly Sindarin people in the fief of Har-Lindon in the name of High King Gil-galad. But though they dwelt there for some years in the early Second Age, they were not content to stay there, and so they went on to dwell in the lands near Lake Nanuiel, in a land that would eventually be called Evendim by men, and they brought with them some Noldor, Sindar, and Green Elves. For some time, Celeborn and his folk dwelt there, but by the year 750 of the Second Age, they had come to Eregion, ruled by Celebrimbor, the grandson of Feanor who once dwelt in Nargothrond, the kingdom of Finrod. There they dwelt, and whether it was there in Eregion or before in the lands near Ninuiel, or even in Lindon, Celeborn and Galadriel's daughter Celebrían was born, sometime before 1350 of the Second Age. But between 1350 and 1400, Galadriel and Celebrían passed through Khazad-dûm and moved to Lorinand, while Celeborn stayed in Eregion, due to his enmity with the dwarves for killing Thingol, even though Longbeards, and not the ones who had killed Thingol, ruled in Khazad-dûm. Then came the War of the Elves and Sauron when, after the creation of the 3 Elven Rings and the One Ring, there was war. Celeborn led a sortie of Elves of Eregion against Sauron, but Celeborn and his forces were pushed back, and eventually he joined with Elrond's army in Lindon. Being overcome by Sauron's forces, Elrond and Celeborn's elves were forced into the north, narrowly escaping the onslaught thanks to some allies coming out of Khazad-dûm in the south. And they came to a hidden dell in the Trollshaws. Thus Celeborn was with Elrond when Imladris or Rivendell was founded, and there they stayed and fought back the first siege of Imladris until the war's end. After the War of the Elves and Sauron was ended, and Eriador was open once again, Galadriel and Celebrían came through Khazad-dûm and went to Imladris to seek Celeborn, and so it was that their family was reunited in 1701 of the Second Age. The first White Council was held there in Imladris, and since Celeborn was a strong and wise leader of the Eldar, I imagine he joined, not only in this first White Council, but even in the White Council of the Third Age with the wizards Gandalf and Saruman. Their daughter Celebrían would meet Elrond during that time in Rivendell, and Elrond fell in love with her, though he did not act on it. After a time in Imladris, Celeborn and Galadriel would go on exploring and living in different parts of Middle-earth, first dwelling in the little inhabited lands between the mouths of the Gwathlo and Anduin rivers with a company of sylvan elves from Lorinand. They would dwell somewhere close to Ethelond and Belfalas, and also near to the place that would be called Dol Amroth by men in the late Third Age. It's possible but doubtful that they or Celeborn alone participated in the War of the Last Alliance, for Galadriel at that time had and would continue to carry her ring Nenya, so perhaps they did not join as to protect that ring. Either way, after the war and the end of the Second Age, they continued on their journeys, from Gondor and the borders of Mordor in the south, to Thranduil's realm in northern Greenwood in the north. Before long, Celeborn, Galadriel, and Celebrían, if their daughter had come with them to Belfalas and on these journeys, once more passed over the Misty Mountains to Imladris, and lived there for some years. In 109 of the Third Age, their daughter Celebrían married Elrond. Eventually, King Amroth of Lorinand perished in the sea, and in 1981 of the Third Age, Celeborn and Galadriel took up residence there, ruling that land as Lothlorien, jointly together as Lord and Lady of the Golden Wood. Their capital city would be built, and its name in part shared the name of Celeborn's father Galathon, for the city was named Caras Galathon. Even though their daughter would come to a sad fate and would take a ship out of Middle-earth, Celeborn and Galadriel stayed for a time, to see the fate of the world in the Third Age. For there was an evil that returned to the land, as the White Council had found. And again, I find it likely that Celeborn would have been on the White Council due to his wisdom and prowess as a warrior, meaning that he would have taken part in their many meetings over the Third Age, and he would have been there during the White Council's attack on Dol Guldur in 2941. And so we come to the events of the War of the Ring. In 3019, Lothlorien took in the Fellowship of the Ring when the group passed their borders from Moria. Celeborn and Galadriel heard the story of the Fellowship and of the fall of Gandalf, and so learned that Durin's Bane was a Balrog of Morgoth. And after hearing about this, Celeborn placed blame on the dwarves for awakening the beast, but Galadriel told him wisdom, and he relented, and apologized. I believe that it was Gimli, in fact, that gave Celeborn even more perspective and forgiveness towards dwarves as well, for he would see that the dwarf praised his wife Galadriel, and with her gift of 3 hairs, Galadriel gave the dwarf her favor. This, I believe, changed Celeborn's animosity with the dwarves. During the Fellowship's stay in Lothlorien, Celeborn and Galadriel gave them advice and gifts, and Celeborn warned the company of the Fangorn Forest, and later Treebeard would hear of this and said that he would have warned the company against Celeborn's forest in the same way, showing that Treebeard and Celeborn knew of one another. Celeborn gave the company boats to use on their way down Anduin. After this, Celeborn was forced to take a more active role in the war, for the forces of Sauron from Dol Guldur launched 3 assaults on the Golden Wood in March. on the 11th, the 15th, and the 22nd. After the fall of Sauron and the destruction of the One Ring in the south, the destruction of Dol Guldur began on March 28th, after Celeborn and his golden host crossed the river Anduin and laid siege to the fortress of Dol Guldur. After winning the battle, Galadriel destroyed the fortress and purified the forest of Mirkwood. Then on April 6th, the day of the Elven New Year, Thranduil and Celeborn met in Mirkwood, representing their realms, and they renamed the forest Aren Losgallen, the Wood of Green Leaves. And while Thranduil would continue to rule the northern part of the forest south of the Narrows was given to Celeborn and was named East Lorien. But with the destruction of the One Ring, the fading of the 3 Elven Rings came, and so Lothlorien would diminish as well. But there was still victory and love to celebrate in the Third Age, and Celeborn, Galadriel, and their folk went to Minas Tirith to attend the wedding of Aragorn and their granddaughter Arwen. They accompanied the procession of Theoden's body back to Edoras, and even came to Isengard, so Celeborn was able to say farewell to Treebeard, whom he called Eldest. Celeborn would bid farewell to King Elisar, whom he called Kin, hoping Aragorn's doom would be other than his, and wishing his treasure remain with him until the end. Indeed, Aragorn was the descendant of Thingol by many generations indeed, and the distant descended nephew of Celeborn as well, beyond the fact that he was also Celeborn's grandson-in-law at that point. And so, on that return journey to the north with Frodo and the others, Celeborn and Galadriel came back into Eregion and held one last council with many of the remaining White Council members there. Ere long, Celeborn came back to Lorien with Galadriel, and at the end of the age, in 3021, Galadriel left Lothlorien forever and would take a ship into the west, but Celeborn lingered in Lorien for a time. It is said that after he grew weary of Lorien, he went to dwell in Imladris with his grandsons, Eladon and Elrohir, as well as some of the remaining elves of Middle-earth. However, the Western Sea called Celeborn home as well, and in the early Fourth Age it was time for him to reunite with his wife and daughter once again, and forevermore. So Celeborn took the last ship with Círdan, the shipwright, into the west, taking with him the last memories of the elder days of Middle-earth, coming at last to white shores and a far green country, under a swift sunrise. And so we come to the end of our tale about Celeborn. From the history of Celeborn the Wise, we see that while we fight for a better day, we must always remember what is important in this world, our families, and let go of the petty grievances that hold us back. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this epic character history of Celeborn. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections about Celeborn and his history? Let me know in the comments below. There is a lot of depth to Celeborn's character in the full telling of his history, and he is an interesting elf in what he brings forth from the Elder Days into the Third Age, as well as in his personality, deeds, virtues, and flaws all. To support the channel, please check out our music channel, Facebook, Twitter, merch, and Patreon for our podcast and Discord server. Links for all of those are in the description below. I want to shout out our Valar tier patrons: Adrian De La Tour, Chris Ortner, Peter Shepard, Samuel McBee, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, and our newest Valar tier patron, Tobias Goldner. Thank you guys so much, it means a lot. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I will see you all again next week with an updated video on the Easterlings of Middle-earth. Everyone, as always, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my great friends.